Bit of off-field news this week as well, significant one, with Michael Edwards returning as FSG's CEO of football. He'll then appoint a new sporting director for Liverpool, and that is 99% expected to be Richard Hughes, who's just left Bournemouth. We'll talk about him a little bit more when that one gets confirmed. Those two will then work together on Liverpool's search for a new manager, whether that's Alonso or somebody else. Klopp says that he had some talks with Edwards about the position, but says that he didn't try and convince him to stay at the club beyond this season. Interestingly, one of the key points as well is that, in terms of FSG, have made a couple of efforts to get Edwards back, and he was a bit resistant, but they're giving him this new role, and they've also said that they're going to let him kind of spearhead the search for a multi-club model for FSG, which is obviously a significant business move for the club. And he said that was a key factor in agreeing to return. So obviously it's been a couple of days now since this was all confirmed. Farrell, this is our sort of first chance to really get into it. Now that we've had a bit of time to digest the news, what do you think of it? Because it feels like a really big step for Liverpool in terms of forming their post-Klopp future.
Yeah, I don't know about you, mate, but I sort of, when I heard the news come through, I was like, oh my God, they've managed to do it, because, I think the interest was there, plenty of reports on it, but, I was sort of thinking, it kind of said it doesn't want to return in any kind of capacity as a sporting director. What kind of role are Liverpool offering him? Sort of knew that, FSG would have to move heaven and earth to sort of bring him back in any sort of capacity around Liverpool, and they have as CEO of football, I believe. But yeah, my predominant feeling was sort of one of, relief, I suppose, to a certain degree, because I think the thing is, you look at the calibre of the figure in Jurgen Klopp, leaving Liverpool this summer. The big question is can Liverpool maintain their sort of upward trajectory without that figurehead in place? And FSG on their part, I suppose, are thinking, well, how do we mitigate risk in this sort of scenario? And by doing that, if you can't get a manager who is of an immediate sort of calibre comparable to Klopp, what you do is ensure that everything behind the scenes is working perfectly. The one man that sort of guarantees that to a degree is Michael Edwards. We've seen this before, and I think Klopp obviously spoke glowingly in his the same press conference where he sort of also admitted that look, I'm not staying just because he's he's coming back. So it does mitigate risk massively for Liverpool. I think as well, what's interesting, and it's part of the reason, a significant part of the reason, obviously, why he is committing to this role, this return with FSG, is because there is scope for progression. Obviously, the immediate priority will be sorting a sporting director, sorting the backroom staff that will accompany, any manager that does come in to replace Jurgen Klopp. But beyond that, of course, as a CEO of football, his task will be to help acquire and identify another football club to bring into the FSG stable, which is massive, really. It's a massive change of direction from Liverpool. We obviously knew that Liverpool and FSG specifically were sniffing around this concept very recently, prior to contemplating selling the club. Brazil was discussed as a destination. I believe Cruzeiro, who obviously now owned by the original Ronaldo, was considered as a potential point of investment. And I think Liverpool have sort of acknowledged where sides like particularly Manchester City with their model are doing well. That obviously I believe the expectation is that any model Liverpool create will more closely resemble Brighton's model than Manchester City's sort of globally sort of spanning banner under the City Football Group. So I'm just to get back to your question, I'm quite excited to see what direction sort of Liverpool go down. I think the important thing is if you can't necessarily guarantee what manager you're going to bring in for the doors, make sure that everything behind the scenes is in tip-top shape. And I think that's what really Fenway have done.
Yeah, I think it's a huge coup to bring him back. I mean, just to start on the multi-club stuff, I think it's not something that I think is going to be hugely welcomed by some Liverpool fans, just in the sense that it's kind of a little bit of a symptom of where football's heading, and just kind of this sort of hyper capitalist situation where you've got kind of these giant clubs maybe acquiring smaller teams overseas and things like that. And I think that isn't sort of a side of the game that a lot of Liverpool fans in particular embrace. So, I can see why it wouldn't sit right with some. I suppose the counter argument to that is Liverpool are where they are within the game. This is clearly the way that it's going for a lot of the top teams. It kind of feels like it's going to be a key part of what the future looks like in the game. And a lot of people would say Liverpool can't allow themselves to be left behind already to a degree. City are obviously leading the way in this area. They've sort of blazed that trail. Their model is going to be a lot more sophisticated than their rivals are. So Liverpool will already be playing catch up there. But obviously we've seen Chelsea as well have basically bought Strasbourg, or their owners have. Brighton, like you mentioned, have got Union SG. Liverpool played in the Europa League group stages, obviously. So yeah, maybe we will see kind of more of that just relationship with 1, 2, 3 teams, however many it is, where players are kind of going on loan and then coming back, rather than kind of a Liverpool football group or anything along those lines. So I think there's a debate to be had there about whether that model is a good thing or not, but maybe less of a debate about whether Liverpool actually need it, based on what the game's going to look like in 10, 15 years' time. So we'll see what approach they take there, whereabouts they look for that club, because, with City, I think everyone thinks about Girona as kind of the main one, especially with the prominence they've had in Spain this season, but they've got teams in Japan, in India, in Brazil as well. So it's kind of a global network for them. So we'll see how that one pans out. And then just on Edwards, and we'll see kind of how the specifics of this role takes shape. I think one thing that makes this especially exciting is the fact that since he's left, there's been a lot of noise about teams like Chelsea and Manchester United, who we know have been, just a picture of dysfunction in recent years, trying to get him, and been unsuccessful in doing that. So it's sort of like almost winning a transfer battle, except for an off-field appointment, and it's for someone who is so sought after and coveted, because I don't think there's any sporting director or sort of behind the scenes figure in world football who is better than Michael Edwards at the job. And there might be somewhere on the same level, but I think what we saw from Edwards, obviously in conjunction with Klopp, and he's not going to be able to make Liverpool a force on his own. He's going to have to get the managerial appointment right. But in terms of that sort of player recruitment side of things, I think he's probably the best in the business. And that's why those other clubs made an attempt to get him. So it's almost a double victory in the sense that he comes back to Liverpool and he can hopefully be the man who's kind of given the keys to the club's future in that regard. But also to keep him at the hands of their rivals as well, because it would have been a bit ominous if he'd been given the kind of resources that Chelsea and Manchester United have been given their managers in the past. So I think it is obviously really good news for Liverpool, and we'll see what happens next in terms of the sporting director appointment with Richard Hughes likely coming in, and then what happens with the manager and whether there's a sort of a new structure that takes shape post-Klopp, because it is going to be obviously quite a significant reset, both culturally and in terms of kind of the hierarchy as well.